The galaxy's most powerful empires looked upon the approaching fleet with a sense of amusement. The ships were small and ancient, barely a threat to anyone, let alone the mighty fleets of the hegemonies, who controlled entire sectors of the galaxy with an iron grip. The Insignificant fleet, as it had been dubbed by those who had seen it from afar, was little more than a joke in the eyes of those who ruled the stars from their gleaming citadels. The ships were rusted and battered with hulls that seemed too thin for the brutal environments they sailed through, but what the empires didn't understand was that these ships were not to be underestimated. The fleet wasn't here to win, it was here to prove a point, to show the galaxy that size and power weren't the only things that mattered, to show that no one was truly insignificant. The fleet was composed of ships from all over the galaxy, vessels from species once thought to be little more than footnotes in history, their names forgotten by the great archives of the Galactic Council. But now they sailed together in an alliance, united by one common cause. No longer would they stand in the shadow of the mighty hegemonies. No longer would they cower under the rule of those who believed themselves to be untouchable. The fleet had a captain, but in truth, the fleet had no single leader. Each ship's crew was led by their own commanders, chosen by their people in an effort to build something larger than the sum of their parts. It was a true coalition, and together they had one mission: to be seen, to make the galaxy aware of what they could accomplish when united by purpose. On the flagship, a human ship once thought of as little more than a relic of a bygone era, stood Captain Elias Ford, staring out at the endless void. He had always known humanity was capable of great things, but to others humanity had been relegated to the outskirts of history, a species that had once dominated the stars only to fall into obscurity, its people scattered and broken throughout the galaxy. His ancestors had been laughed at for their hubris. Their dreams of grand empires had been dashed by the overwhelming forces of nature and war. But now humanity stood at the forefront of a new movement, a movement that would challenge everything the galaxy believed about power. Ford gazed out of the viewports as the fleet moved ever closer to their destination, a heavily fortified star system located at the edge of the Combine's territory. It was a symbol of the galaxy's arrogance, a place where the powerful were untouchable and the weak had no place. But now that very system would be their proving ground. They would show the galaxy that power wasn't just about size or technology, it was about ingenuity, it was about heart. The Insignificant fleet was about to change everything. No one would ever dare underestimate humanity again. No one would ever mock them or their allies again. The galaxy was about to learn that the smallest of ships could be the most dangerous. Ford turned to his crew with a steady hand and spoke with quiet determination. Our time has come. Every single one of you has trained for this moment. Every sacrifice we've made has led us to this point. We're not here to survive. We're here to show them who we really are. He paused and looked out once more into the darkness. They won't know what hit them. The Insignificant fleet moved through the void toward the combined star system. Like a shadow slipping unnoticed between the stars, their ships glided silently past the watchful eyes of the galaxy's most powerful empires. The mockery had not stopped since they left their homeworlds. The leaders of the great hegemonies continued to laugh at the fleet's humble appearance, calling it a fool's errand and a waste of time. Their diplomats had already written off the fleet's potential. The council had placed bets on how long it would take before the fleet was obliterated in a battle of superior force. But the commanders of the fleet weren't here to win in the traditional sense. They were here to send a message, to show the galaxy that power didn't always come in the form of advanced technology and vast fleets. Elias Ford stood on the bridge of the human ship, his eyes fixed on the approaching system. He had expected mockery. It had always been the way of the galaxy to belittle those who dared challenge the established order. But now he felt something else beneath the calm exterior of his face, a deep sense of resolve. As the captain of the fleet, he knew the true cost of failure, but he also knew the price of success would be far higher. The fleet was outgunned, outclassed, and outnumbered, but what they had that no one else did was each other. The crew of the Insignificant fleet was a mix of species bound together by a desire to prove their worth and their right to exist in the galaxy on their own terms. The Federation had once been the dominant force in the galaxy. Their massive fleets and technological marvels were thought to be untouchable, But when they had first approached humanity centuries ago, the Federation had seen them as primitive and weak a species still struggling to grasp the basics of space travel. Their ships were small and unrefined, yet humanity had an innate drive to push forward, to explore the unknown, to innovate. When faced with obstacles, humanity didn't shy away from them. They met them head-on with ingenuity and grit. And as they grew, so too did their understanding of the universe. They had discovered things others had never even thought of, ideas that made even the most advanced civilizations question their own limitations. The fleet's composition was as varied as the species it represented. There were ships of every size and shape, some built to withstand the coldest reaches of space, while others were designed for speed and maneuverability. The ships were far from perfect, and each had its share of flaws, but it was the flaws that made them unique. It was the flaws that made them human. The crew members had all seen things no one else had been forced to endure. They were survivors, and now they would prove to the galaxy that survival was its own form of strength. Elias looked to his left, where an officer from the Carthan Coalition stood, a towering figure with 4 arms and a wide, armored face. She was studying the tactical map of the star system ahead of them. Her name was Jara, and she had been a commander of one of the most formidable fleets in her home sector. Before the Coalition's collapse, they had been told her species would never work with humanity, but here she was standing side by side with them in this fleet, a reminder that when the galaxy thought you had nothing left to give, sometimes you could still surprise them. He turned his attention back to the stars ahead of them. The combined forces were formidable, but Elias didn't care about their power, their weapons, or their ships. They would find out soon enough that the Insignificant fleet had a weapon none of them had prepared, for they had nothing to lose and everything to prove to the galaxy. The mockery would end here. They would show them all what it meant to underestimate humanity and its allies. The fleet slowed as they entered the edge of the system. Their final approach would be critical. The Combined would be waiting for them, and the battles would soon begin. But no matter the outcome, the Insignificant fleet would make sure the galaxy would never forget who had dared to challenge the status quo. The Insignificant fleet emerged from the warp into the heart of the Combined star system. Their arrival met with silence across the comms channels. The Combined's defenses were already in place, a massive network of satellites and weapons platforms surrounding the primary planet like a shield, ready to annihilate anything that dared approach. At first glance, the Insignificant fleet looked like no more than a handful of aging ships with no real chance against the Combined's well-established superiority. But appearances were deceiving. Elias Ford's eyes were sharp, his mind focused on the mission. The time for mockery was over. The fleet moved into formation, spread out in a loose defensive shape that appeared to be clumsy to anyone who didn't understand the tactical brilliance behind it. The human ship, an old battleship named Liberator *, led the way, its hull scarred from years of service but still formidable. Around it, a hodgepodge of ships followed, small but fast scout vessels from the Zornari, heavy freighters adapted into weapons platforms from the Rodrax, and stealth ships from the Minthians, each one a product of its people's ingenuity and desperation. As they approached the first line of defense, the Combined sensors lit up, immediately detecting the fleet's presence. The mocking began again over the comms, the commanding officer of the Combined's defense fleet scoffing at the insignificance of the approaching force. They were ready for an easy victory. But as the Combined launched their first salvo of high-velocity plasma torpedoes, the Insignificant fleet showed them something unexpected. The ships of the Insignificant fleet, scattered with practiced precision, weaving in and out of the torpedoes' trajectories in a display of coordination that took the Combined's commanders off guard. The Combined forces were used to overwhelming their enemies with firepower and sheer numbers, but here they were facing an enemy that didn't fight like any force they'd encountered before. The Insignificant fleet didn't engage head-on. Instead, they harassed their enemies, striking from unexpected angles and retreating just as quickly. Every time the Combined forces adjusted their targeting, the Insignificant fleet was already somewhere else, slipping between their heavy guns and capital ships like shadows in the night. One of the Combined destroyers, confident in its superior firepower, attempted to lock onto the Liberator *. It unleashed a barrage of energy blasts, expecting an easy hit. But Ford had anticipated this, and with a calm voice, he gave the order. Now, evasive maneuvers. The Liberator abruptly veered off course, causing the energy blast to miss by mere inches. In that instant, the smaller ships from the Insignificant fleet moved into position, taking advantage of the Combine's distracted fire and launching quick but devastating counterstrikes. A small fleet of Mynthian stealth ships, invisible to the enemy's sensors, launched precision strikes on the Combine's shield generators, weakening them significantly. Within moments, the tide of the battle began to shift. The first of the Combine's defensive platforms fell, followed by a second. Panic began to set in on the enemy's side as their systems flagged errors and miscalculations. Their fire was inaccurate, their coordination was faltering. The Insignificant fleet had been underestimated, and now the Combine's overconfidence was their undoing. Captain Ford watched the chaos unfold on the main screen, his heart racing with adrenaline. But his mind remained clear. This was not the end. This was only the beginning. They had broken through the first line of defense, but the real challenge lay ahead. The Combine's flagship, a monstrous dreadnought, was waiting in the distance, poised to bring the full force of their military might to bear. Ford knew that victory here wasn't guaranteed, but what he saw in front of him wasn't a desperate struggle. It was the beginning of something far more powerful. The Insignificant fleet was no longer just a nuisance. They were a force to be reckoned with, and the Combined was starting to realize it. The battle had escalated beyond anyone's expectations. The Combined, once confident in their ability to crush the Insignificant fleet with ease, now found themselves on the defensive. Their flagship, the Dreadnought Eclipse loomed in the distance, its enormous silhouette casting a shadow over the battlefield. The Dreadnought was equipped with a weapon that could obliterate entire fleets in a single shot, a hypercharged beam capable of cutting through any ship's armor. It was the Combine's ultimate weapon, and they had been saving it for the moment they deemed necessary. The time had come, and the commanders of the Combine were certain it would end the fight once and for all. On board the Liberator Captain Elias Ford observed the growing threat with a level of focus that bordered on the uncanny. His hand hovered over the tactical display as the Dreadnought began to charge its massive weapon. The fleet was still in disarray, small ships darting in and out of range, launching their uncoordinated assaults. But Ford knew the fleet couldn't last much longer in this form. The Eclipse weapon was too powerful, and even their evasive tactics wouldn't save them once it fired. They needed to act, and they needed to act now. All ships prepare for Phase 2, Ford said, his voice calm but urgent. The order was simple but dangerous. They had to change their strategy, throw the enemy off balance once again, and exploit the weaknesses they had discovered in the Combine's over-reliance on brute force. The fleet, still scattered, began to regroup under Ford's command. They formed a new pattern, seemingly chaotic to the untrained eye, but perfect in its unpredictability. The Mynthian stealth ships, which had proven invaluable in their earlier strikes, moved into position again. They would blind the enemy's sensors, making it harder for the Combined to track the Insignificant fleet's movements. The Zornary battlecruisers, sleek and fast, set up defensive positions around the freighters, which had been retrofitted with experimental energy shields, taking the brunt of the fire while their smaller counterparts attacked. The Eclipse fired, its colossal beam cutting through space like a bolt of lightning. The beam moved with terrifying speed toward the heart of the Insignificant fleet, and for a moment, it seemed all was lost. But then, just as the beam was about to hit, the freighter's shields flared to life, absorbing the blow. The shields weren't perfect, but they held long enough for the fleet to react. The Combined Dreadnought's weapon had drained the ship's power reserves, and for a few precious seconds, the Eclipse was vulnerable. Ford saw his opening. Now, he shouted, and the fleet responded instantly. The Zornary cruisers moved in, launching a barrage of high-powered missiles at the Dreadnought's exposed energy core. They didn't need to destroy the ship entirely, just disrupt its systems long enough for the next strike. In the chaos, the Minthian stealth ships surged forward, their cloaking systems flickering as they momentarily became visible. They fired a series of devastating torpedoes aimed at the Combine's command deck, breaching the ship's reinforced hull. Meanwhile, the Liberator swung around in a wide arc, positioning itself directly above the dreadnought, targeting its remaining weak spots. Elias Ford, standing at the center of the Liberator bridge, felt the rush of adrenaline flood his senses. All ships, prepare for the final push, he commanded, his eyes locked on the tactical display. With the dreadnought's power core compromised, the insignificant fleet had an opportunity they could not afford to waste. The Combined would be left with no choice but to fight with everything they had, and Ford intended to make sure they knew who they were up against. The fleet surged forward in unison, their coordinated assault pushing through the remnants of the Combined's defenses. The Eclipse fired again, but its shots were wild, misdirected, as its systems struggled to recalibrate. It was vulnerable, its crew disoriented, and for the first time in the battle, the leaders of the Combine understood they had made a grave mistake. The insignificant fleet was not a joke, and they were not going to be easily brushed aside. As the Eclipse began to list to one side, its shield systems failing, Captain Ford's voice rang out once more. Now we finish this. For everyone who's been written off, the final strike was about to begin. The Eclipse was weakening, its hull groaning under the strain of the insignificant fleet's relentless assault. The Combined dreadnought, once thought invincible, was now a wounded giant. Its massive turrets fired erratically, as its once impenetrable shields flickered weakly. The Combined commanders were scrambling, but it was too late. The tide of the battle had turned, and the insignificant fleet was poised to land the killing blow. Captain Elias Ford stood rigid in the command chair of the Liberator his mind working with cold precision. His hand hovered above the communication console, ready to issue the final command. The fleet had already delivered devastating blows to the Eclipse power core, its systems overloaded and its weaponry offline. But Ford knew that the dreadnought's sheer size and firepower still made it a formidable threat. If they didn't finish it now, the Eclipse could still strike back with deadly force. Prepare to fire, Ford ordered, his voice sharp and controlled. Target the exposed bridge and core. The tactical display in front of him flickered with data as the crew of the Liberator prepared for the final strike. The Zornari battlecruisers and Minthian stealth ships had already done their part, creating openings for the Liberator to make its move. Now, it was time for the human ship to deliver the death blow. The fleet moved into position, spreading out in a loose formation to minimize the chance of being hit by a desperate counterattack. The Liberator was in the perfect spot to strike, its weapons locked on to the crippled dreadnought's vulnerable areas. Ford's fingers hovered over the firing controls. He could feel the weight of the moment, the culmination of everything they had worked for. Every risk, every sacrifice had led them to this point. The Combined fleet, now fractured and disorganized, was no longer a threat. The flagship was their last hope, and as it began to list further to the side, the insignificant fleet closed in for the kill. It wasn't just about destroying the Eclipse it was about sending a message, proving to the galaxy of the so-called insignificant species could stand toe-to-toe with the most powerful empires in the galaxy. Ford's voice rang out across the bridge. Now, he commanded. The Liberator fired, its cannons charging up with a deep, resonating hum that shook the ship's hull. A barrage of energy blasts streaked across the void, hitting the Eclipse with pinpoint accuracy. The first round hit the dreadnought's bridge, smashing through its reinforced shields and tearing into its command center. The second round followed close behind, aimed directly at the ship's power core. There was no room for mercy, no time for hesitation. The dreadnought was done. The Eclipse's entire upper structure erupted in a massive explosion, a shockwave rippling through space as the explosion consumed the once proud warship. The sound, or rather the absence of sound, was deafening in its silence. The sheer force of the blast sent a ripple through the remaining combined ships, their weapons faltering in confusion and panic. It was over. The mighty flagship of the Combine was no more. On board the Liberator Asterisk, the crew erupted into a mix of cheers and disbelief. They had done it. Against all odds, they had destroyed the Combine's most powerful weapon. Ford allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction, but there was no time to celebrate. The battle wasn't over yet. The Insignificant fleet still had work to do, and they had just shown the galaxy that they could defeat the so-called Invincible. "Prepare for secondary objectives," Ford said, his voice calm again. "We've crippled their flagship, but we need to ensure they know who they've just fought. All ships, continue the attack." The Insignificant fleet pressed on, their resolve stronger than ever. The Combine had been forced to retreat, their pride shattered in the face of a force they had dismissed as nothing more than a joke. The Insignificant fleet had proven that size and strength weren't the only things that mattered in war. Strategy, ingenuity, and the will to fight made all the difference. As the Liberator moved forward, Ford couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment. The galaxy had just witnessed something extraordinary. The Insignificant fleet, once mocked and ignored, had just defeated the most powerful military force in the galaxy. And now, the Combine, along with every other empire, would know the truth. Humanity and its allies were a force to be reckoned with. The battle was won, but the real war, one for respect and recognition, was just beginning. The aftermath of the Eclipse Asterisk's destruction rippled through the galaxy like a shockwave. The Insignificant fleet had broken through a barrier that no one had thought possible, and now, as the wreckage of the once mighty dreadnought drifted in space, the surviving Combined ships were in full retreat. The battlefield was a chaotic mess of debris and fleeing enemies, but the fleet wasn't done yet. They had won a monumental victory, but the true consequences of their actions were just beginning to unfold. Captain Elias Ford stood on the bridge of the Liberator Asterisk, his eyes focused on the remaining Combined ships that were desperately trying to regroup and flee the system. The battle had been a success, but Ford knew this victory would draw the attention of far more than just the Combine. The galaxy was watching. The powerful empires that had dismissed the Insignificant fleet as a threat were now beginning to take notice. And that Ford knew would change everything. "We've done it," said Lieutenant Kara, Ford's second-in-command, her voice filled with awe. She stood at his side, her eyes scanning the tactical display. "The Eclipse Asterisk is gone, and the Combine is falling apart. But this changes everything." Ford nodded slowly. "It does. We've shattered the illusion of invincibility. But there's more to come. The Combine won't just take this lying down, and neither will the other empires watching this unfold." He turned to the communications officer. "Send a message to the fleet. We're not finished yet. We need to make sure this victory isn't just a one-time thing. We have to show the galaxy that we're more than just a fluke." The officer nodded and began to broadcast a message across the stars, a simple one, but one that would send a ripple of fear and hope across the galaxy. The Insignificant fleet has proven that even the smallest of ships, the weakest of alliances, can overcome the greatest of empires. We will no longer be ignored. We are here to stay. Across the battlefield, the remaining ships of the Insignificant fleet pressed on. The Zornary battlecruisers were picking off the straggling Combined vessels, their speed and precision making them a nightmare for the retreating enemy. Meanwhile, the Minthian stealth ships darted in and out of the remaining enemy formations, launching targeted strikes that disabled the Combine's weapons systems. The Rodrax freighters, though slow, were now fortified and bristling with makeshift weaponry, taking on the role of forward support, their heavy shields absorbing incoming fire while the smaller ships continued their assault. The tide had turned completely. The Combine was on the brink of collapse in this sector, their military shattered, their pride broken. But even as the last of their ships retreated into warp, Ford knew that the galaxy would not let them forget this victory. The insignificant fleet had just proven that no one was truly untouchable. No empire, no matter how vast or powerful, could maintain its stranglehold forever. In the hours that followed, the news spread like wildfire. News feeds from every corner of the galaxy flashed with reports of the insignificant fleet's stunning victory. Hegemonies and alliances scrambled to process what had just happened. The Combine, once thought to be the pinnacle of military might, had been humbled. But beyond that, the ripple effect reached far and wide. Suddenly, empires that had ignored humanity and its allies were beginning to question their assumptions. Ford sat back in his chair, his eyes tired but determined. "We've set the stage," he muttered to himself. "But the real battle is just beginning." In the wake of the insignificant fleet's victory, a new chapter in the galaxy's history was about to unfold. The empires that had laughed and mocked humanity, the same ones that had dismissed the so-called insignificant species, were now facing a reality they couldn't ignore. Humanity and its allies had proven that they were capable of far more than anyone had anticipated. The insignificant fleet had just begun to show the galaxy that sometimes it wasn't the size of the fleet that mattered, but the strength of will, the heart of the people, and the unity of those who refused to be silenced. As Ford stared out at the stars, he knew that whatever came next, humanity and its allies would be ready. The galaxy had underestimated them before, but they would never make that mistake again. The insignificant fleet had proven that they were not insignificant at all. The insignificant fleet had done what no one thought possible, but now the real consequences were beginning to unfold. The news of their victory over the Combine had spread like wildfire across the galaxy, triggering a ripple of unrest and fear among the powerful empires that had long dominated the stars. For decades, these empires had lived under the illusion of invulnerability, secure in the knowledge that no one could challenge their might. But now, in the wake of the insignificant fleet's audacious triumph, everything was changing. Captain Elias Ford knew that the insignificant fleet's victory was just the beginning. They had broken the Combine's power in this sector, but now the galaxy's attention was squarely on them. The Combine wasn't the only empire with vast military power. There were others, older and even more formidable, who had been watching with growing interest. If they saw the insignificant fleet as a threat, they would not hesitate to crush it underfoot. The challenge now wasn't just surviving, it was navigating the political and military fallout from their actions. Ford had received a communique from the Galactic Council, a collection of the most powerful empires in the galaxy, and their message was clear: cease your actions or face the full might of the Galactic Order. It was a threat, but it was also a recognition. They had been forced to acknowledge the insignificant fleet's power. The question was, how would humanity and its allies respond? "Captain," said Lieutenant Kara, her voice tight with concern, "the Combine's allies are already mobilizing. We've picked up intelligence from their comms channels. They're angry and they're afraid. They're preparing to retaliate." Ford's jaw tightened. "I knew it wouldn't be long. They'll see us as a symbol of defiance, an enemy that needs to be destroyed before it spreads. But we can't back down. Not now, not after everything we fought for." "I understand, sir," Kara said, her voice firm. "But we need a plan. The fleet can't hold up against multiple empires at once. We need to decide whether to face them head-on or take a more subtle approach. A direct confrontation could end badly for us." Ford gazed out at the stars, his mind turning over the possibilities. The Liberator and the rest of the fleet had proven their strength, but they were still outnumbered. The Combine wasn't the only power in the galaxy that had underestimated humanity's resolve. But now, the galaxy was watching, waiting to see what they would do next. "We don't have the luxury of time," Ford finally said, his voice resolute. "We'll send a message, not just to the Combine's allies, but to the entire galaxy. If they want to fight, we'll give them one, but we won't make it easy. We'll strike at the heart of their empires in ways they never expect. We've already shown them that we can take down their strongest ship. Now, let's make sure they know we're not going anywhere." The crew of the Liberator responded with a unified resolve. They weren't just a ragtag group of ships. They were a force to be reckoned with. Their victory had changed everything. They had proven that even the smallest fleets, the most underestimated species, could turn the tide against the mightiest of empires. Ford turned back to his crew, his gaze unwavering. Prepare for the next phase of the operation. We'll need to be swift, and we'll need to be unpredictable. The galaxy has just woken up to our existence. Let's make sure they never forget it. The Insignificant fleet wasn't just about proving a point anymore. It was about survival. It was about showing the galaxy that the age of unquestioned domination by the few was over. The fleets of the great empires were about to learn that when humanity and its allies stood together, they were anything but insignificant. As the fleet prepared to move into their next phase, Ford couldn't help but feel a surge of anticipation. The universe had underestimated them once before. It wouldn't make that mistake again. This was no longer a battle for survival. It was a battle for the future of the galaxy, and the Insignificant fleet had already set the course. The Insignificant fleet was on the move again, its ships carving a path through the galaxy, determined to send one final message to the empires that had tried to crush them. They had broken the Combine, humiliated its pride, and now the galaxy's greatest powers were watching, waiting, wondering what humanity and its allies would do next. The fleet had been tested in ways no one thought possible, but now it was ready to make its mark on the universe, to prove once and for all that they were a force that could not be ignored. Captain Elias Ford stood at the center of the Liberator bridge, his eyes scanning the data that streamed across the screens. The fleet was preparing to take on the heart of the galaxy's power, a series of fortified systems held by the largest and most influential empires. The message was simple. They were coming for the heart of the establishment, and they would not stop until their place in the galaxy was secured. "We've had some responses," Kara said, her voice tight with urgency as she looked over the reports. "The Calais Empire is moving its fleets into position, and we're picking up messages from the Elorian Federation. They're all preparing for war." Ford didn't flinch. "Let them come. We've shown we can break through their walls before. Now we show them what happens when you push a people to their limit." As they entered the core of the galaxy, the stars grew brighter, and the distance between the Insignificant fleet and their enemies shrank rapidly. The Calais and the Elorians were not the Combine. They were older, more seasoned, with fleets and technology far beyond what the Combine had deployed. But they lacked one thing. They underestimated humanity's ability to adapt, to improvise, and to strike with surgical precision. The Insignificant fleet wasn't just a military force anymore. It had become a symbol, a rallying point for those who had long been ignored, oppressed, or brushed aside by the galaxy's power brokers. Their numbers had swelled in the wake of their victory over the Combine. New allies, from smaller empires to individual systems, had flocked to their cause, inspired by the audacity and success of the Galactic fleet. It wasn't just humanity now. It was a coalition of species, united by a single purpose: to take down the old order and create a new one. "Captain, the Calais fleet has made contact," said the comms officer, his voice tense. "They're demanding our immediate surrender. They want us to stand down and face judgment for our actions." Ford's lips curled into a smile. "Let them. But we're not standing down. Not for anyone. We'll meet them head-on and remind them that the Insignificant fleet isn't just a nuisance anymore." He turned to Kara. "Prepare the fleet. We'll break through them, just like we did the Combine. We'll show them that our strength lies not in numbers or firepower, but in the will to fight and the courage to face what they thought impossible." The Liberator surged forward, leading the charge. The rest of the fleet followed, each ship in perfect synchronization. The Calais fleet, massive and imposing, had already begun to move into formation, their warships ready to decimate any opponent that dared challenge their superiority. The Elorian Federation, watching from a distance, was ready to back up their allies, knowing that the galaxy was at a crossroads. But the Insignificant fleet had something the great empires did not: unity. They weren't just a coalition of ships. They were a unified front, willing to fight and die for each other, for their future. As the two fleets neared one another, a silence fell over the bridge of the Liberator Asterisk. The moment had arrived. Engage, Ford ordered, his voice calm, resolute. The Insignificant fleet sprang into action, their ships scattering with unmatched precision. Every ship had a role to play, from the Zornary battle cruisers, launching missile barrages, to the stealthy Minthian ships slipping into the shadows to disable key systems on the Calais vessels. The Rodrax freighters, once seen as useless, now served as mobile fortresses, their heavy shields absorbing incoming fire while the rest of the fleet struck. The first strike was swift and unexpected. The Calais ships, which had prepared for a traditional battle, found themselves caught off guard by the Insignificant fleet's unorthodox tactics. Their ships were taking hits from multiple angles at once, their coordination crumbling in the face of an enemy that refused to fight by the rules. The Elorians, too, were thrown off balance, unsure of how to respond to a force that was so unpredictable, so tenacious. Ford watched the chaos unfold on the screens, a fire igniting in his chest. This was it, the culmination of everything they had worked for. The galaxy would never forget the Insignificant fleet. They had come from nothing, been written off as weak, insignificant. But now, with the Calais and Elorians faltering before them, they had proven that no empire, no matter how powerful, was untouchable. "We've got them on the ropes," Kara said, her voice filled with pride. Ford nodded, his eyes scanning the battlefield. "Not yet. Not until the message is clear. We're just getting started."